Registered reports are a type of scientific publication in which a study's research methodology and proposed analyses are peer-reviewed before the actual data collection begins. This publishing format emphasizes the importance of the research question and the quality of the methodology rather than the results themselves. Experimental Physiology is one of the only physiology journals to offer authors this article type. We are proud to have published our first full registered report, one with both protocol and results, by Farrow et al. In this discussion, we talk more about the article type and its benefits in detail, and hope this may encourage you and your colleagues to submit your own registered report to Experimental Physiology.
My name is Josh Hersant. I'm the Deputy Managing Editor at the Physiological Society, and I'm joined today by our current Editor-in-Chief at Experimental Physiology, Damian Bailey, our previous Editor-in-Chief, Mike Tipton, and the lead author of the Registered Reports Editorial, Peter Rasmussen. So Mike, I think we'll start with you as the Editor-in-Chief when Registered Reports were introduced. Can you tell us a bit more about where the idea came from, why this came about, the need for it in physiology?
We had been talking about replication. The previous editor-in-chief, Paul McLaughlin, was very much involved in that. And we were also looking to find a way to support not just ECRs, but at that time we were also considering mid-career researchers as well, who tend to have a large burden placed upon them. It's also clear that, that ideas are really important in what we do, and it was a way to try and think about how way we could register an idea. And if you add to that I was reading lots of reviews by the excellent team that support experimental physiology, the reviewers, but not just the reviewers, also the statistics and ethics experts. And it just seemed to me that it was a real shame to be telling people that, we can't publish your paper, if you had done this or if you had done that. It's all a bit past tense. And so when all those things came together in sort of a perfect storm to say, well, why don't we try and give people some feedback at a time when it will make a real difference? And that's not just good for them. It's also good for the reviewers to think that they're actually making a contribution to better science rather than something that's going to exclude the paper at the end of the process. And so that's where it started from. It had lots of things that just coalesced into this seemed to be the way to go. There was some, I think, initial reluctance from some of the reviewers who thought, well, they might end up having to review things twice. But of course, if people submit their protocol, get their feedback, and then follow that particular protocol, the second review can be fairly light touch, provided that's that initial protocol is followed. And it also increases significantly from about 10% to 70% your chances of getting published. So it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time,
Yeah, that's great. I think Peter or Damien, the editorial that you've written that celebrates our first published registered reports protocol and results touches upon a few of the things that Mike mentioned there. I don't know if there's anything that you'd perhaps like to address in terms of some of the misconceptions about this type of submission, or some of the things that you're really looking to drive as part of this registered reports initiative.
Well, to me, the most important thing is that you actually also give both the authors and the referees a chance to think before they act, and I think that's really important. And you say, don't we always, when we write protocols? Yes, but often the thinking is sort of interweaved into both doing the experiment and writing the paper. And that invariably leads to, I wouldn't call it shortcutting, because that's sort of putting people in a bad light, but there is just a whole different set of strength to having decided before you do something how you're going to analyze it, how you're going to treat your results, as to the conclusion power you will have in the end, because everything will be sort of pre-specified a priori. And that holds a much more credibility and power than doing something post hoc once you have the data.
Yeah, and I think, we have a replication, a reproducibility crisis across the board in science. And I think, at experimental physiology, what we're really committed to is, maintaining the quality bar moving forwards. And as Mike says, and Peter, thinking about your protocol before you actually action any data collection, it's key. Singularly, I think, certainly with the PhD students in my lab, what they find the most challenging aspect of doing research is designing a solid experiment and powering it from a statistical perspective. That's always the bête noire in all of the grant applications. It's always the challenge because they're not formally statistically trained. And what it encourages is to reach out to an interdisciplinary field, and effectively this is what integrative physiology is all about. It's bringing in different specialities. Peter has raised a number of issues that we've talked about in the past in terms of some of the myths, some of the challenges, the hurdles perhaps that authors might incorrectly perceive as being hurdles with a registered research report. And perhaps Peter, Mike, we can talk about some of those. Peter, limited to hypothesis-driven research. That's one of the questions that comes up.
It's not, basically, because even exploratory efforts will benefit from having thought about what it is that you're doing, and even when you're doing exploration, you'd like to power your study such that whatever you're mostly interested in comes out as a valid finding in that sense. So definitely it's not limited to any particular type of research, or such as hypothesis driven or whatever it may be. So that's not what we'd like to exclude in any sense with this.
And in terms of its flexibility, if you've got a change in the protocol, the physiology is by its very nature exploratory. And if you find something that is serendipitous, how does the registered research report accommodate that?
Well, I don't see why it can't accommodate it fairly easily, because you simply just report. And again, you're not handcuffed to experimental physiology. If you really come across a Nobel laureate worthy finding, and you can publish it in Nature, experimental physiology will not stop you from doing that. And most likely the chance of getting that finding is probably already been enhanced by the fact that you had someone looking over your protocol before you did your experiment. So that's not a limiting factor either. Certainly not.
I'm just going to make a quick point about this. Although I come back to ideas, and I know that people increasingly believe that publications, are the currency of academia. But of course, the foundation of that is to have an idea, and sometimes it takes a while to transfer that idea into a funded project that has been analysed and reported. And so for me, this was quite a nice way of getting an idea, date stamped, as early as possible.
You also can claim some primacy, or you're the first to come up with this idea. Probably you aren't, but you're the first one to put words and actions behind it when you're writing your registered report, and it gives you I don't know, not the bragging rights, so to say, but it does confirm that where the idea came from, and that alleviates some of the fear that everybody has on disclosing their ideas to everybody else, because what if somebody else runs with it? And experimental physiology keeps a tight ship, so of course that type of behavior will not be accepted from any of the referees involved in the registered report. Just to follow up on one of the things that Damian mentioned in his last question. So another thing is that, of course, you find something that is completely unexpected and like we said, almost Nobel laureate worthy. But there's also things where things aren't completely going like they should, and you have deviations from your protocol. But again, the registered report can easily handle that, because all we're asking is that you disclose your protocol deviations. That gives the reader and the referees an idea about, well, what happened, and most people will say, okay, that is physiology. Sometimes even your best of plans, they die when they meet reality. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to air some of your pilot study findings as well, of course, because so much of the research has to be piloted in order to inform that sample size calculation. And, funders are looking at this very positively as well, because the last thing they want to do is to fund research that is ultimately not sufficiently powered to detect that treatment effect. So it's got a lot of wins across the board in so many different ways. Coming at it from very different angles. I mean, I've certainly learned a huge amount going through the review process. When you look to submit a paper, the reviewers come back, perhaps critiquing some of your analyses. So often the critique can focus on the experimental design or the power calculations, the statistical analyses. So if you can have this effectively squared away a priori before you actually start collecting data, you're in that optimal position. And it all, to me, comes down to the quality of the research you're doing and the interpretation of the findings and the translational impact of that research. And I think certainly at Experimental Physiology, this is what we're really keen to, to really optimize moving forward.